How would you like a crime justified if it was committed against you or someone that you love? How would you feel about a murderer if he took the life of someone that you love? Would you want them to be allowed to maintain some sort of life behind bars with the possibility of parole or escaping? Or would you want to step in and be the voice for the victim who is no longer living in order to ensure that the criminal gets treated with as much disregard as they displayed when taking another life? The death penalty has long been a sought-out consequence for heinous crimes, dating as far back to 18th century BC and more so in the colonial periods of the United States. As the crime rate escalates, the support for the death penalty continues to grow. However, there still are those individuals that frown upon it. Everyone is entitled to their stance on capital punishment. However, I would like to discuss with you the pros that are perceived when it comes to the death penalty. The first one will be closure and retribution for the families, deterrence of crimes, preventing the continuance of life behind bars, meaning preventing the criminal from getting to lead a somewhat normal life behind bars. The fact that the death penalty can potentially reduce the prison overpopulation, and it aids in a plea bargaining strategy. I would like to now present the first argument for pro-death penalty. I want to begin with the most obvious of the arguments, retribution and closure for the victims' families. All lives are sacred and important, and for one human to take another human's life in the heat of the moment or premeditatedly calls for a punishment equal to the crime that they committed. Closure to the families is an important factor and should be highly considered. Here are a few cases in which the families fought for many years against many appeals in order to ensure that the criminal got the death penalty. The first one I want to discuss is the Sweetheart murders committed in 1980. This was the brutal and humiliating murder of an 18-year-old college couple in Davis, California. After 3 decades and at the relief of the victims' families, Richard Hirschfield was finally sentenced to death on November 20th, 2012. The Quick Trip killing is the next one. This is a killing that took place in 1995. 4 men beat Richard Yost, a night clerk at the Quick Trip, to death with a baseball bat in order to steal the 2 safes that were at the location. 2 of the men have already been executed. 1 is appealing the death sentence and 1 got life in prison. Whenever they actually found these guys, they had wads of cash and they had taken the time to go out and buy brand new Nikes. So Richard Yost, a husband and a father of 2 young boys, his life was worth some cash and some Nikes. The third one I wanted to discuss is the murder of 19-year-old Amy Robinson, a mentally challenged grocery stacker at Kroger's in Arlington, Texas, on February 15, 1998. This was committed by Robert Neville and Michael Hall. They coaxed Amy into their vehicle, seeing as they were co-workers of Amy, so she trusted them. They drove her out to a rural area in Fort Worth, and they shot her in the chest with a .22 rifle. And if you would like to know why, it's because their lives sucked, per their statements that they made to the police. They wanted to go out and just kill someone. So Amy's family finally got closure when Neville was executed on February 8, 2006, and Hall was executed on February 15, 2011, which was actually the anniversary of Amy's death. And while retribution and closure are the first things that come to mind when seeking out the advantages of capital punishment, crime deterrence and preventing more murders is also a popular argument that is made. Not only can murders be prevented and reduced outside of the prison walls, but also inside. Criminals who are sentenced to life in prison also often commit crimes inside the prison, which include murders of fellow inmates and prison guards. There have been several cases where criminals have been paroled and commit the same crime once they're out of prison. Most of these criminals are not first-time offenders, so in order to ensure that these crimes are put to a halt, extreme measures for justice need to be taken. Now, as if the fact that crimes can continue behind bars is not enough, I would like to discuss the fact that a criminal can continue their life behind bars. While the family of a murder victim is grieving and accepting their loss, a criminal is getting settled into his or her new environment. Here are a few privileges that they are granted. Inmates still have rights, period. They have prisoner rights, while a victim's right to live wasn't even considered at the time that their life was taken. They're able to adjust to life in prison while maintaining many of the privileges that they had outside of the prison walls, such as television, education, work, socializing, exercise, and also possessing personal property within their cells. The ACLU actually works to protect the rights of these prisoners so that they may lead lives of rehabilitation behind bars, whereas their victims get no chance at rehabilitation, seeing as, in most cases, they are no longer living. There is always the argument that an innocent person may be executed due to errors in the justice system. However, in an excerpt from the book Crime, Control, and Justice in America, Paul Keeve states that the response is to point to the extensive system of appeals, presumably giving the defendant every advantage in his or her defense and all but eliminating the possibility of error. If a rare mistake does lead to a wrongful execution, retentionists often add, it is a justified risk for the system to take in the interest of accomplishing its purpose of deterrence. Now that we've discussed a criminal's continuance of life while in prison, I would like to point out the fact that most prisons are overpopulated, and that issue can be resolved with the death penalty. It's safe to assume that with more and more crimes being committed and the ambivalence for the death penalty, the prison population will continue to grow with criminals who deserve to be executed. Capital punishment inflicted on criminals who justly deserve it would potentially aid in reducing the overcrowding that the prisons face. In an article on overcrowding in prison from Time magazine, it says, because of the overcrowding, it was difficult for the guards to monitor prisoners and to prevent violence from breaking out. There were frequent power outages, and the sewage systems were overtaxed, creating a risk of disease. Immediate action is necessary, the governor warned, to prevent death and harm. I would like to discuss with you the last advantage of maintaining the death penalty as a punishment option. Even if you are against the death penalty and do not support it, there is still the fact that having it present and available as an aid in plea bargaining. Kent Schedeger, legal director of the Criminal Justice League Foundation, wrote a brief that stated in regards to plea bargaining and the death penalty. According to the brief, Kuziemko, in 2006, studied the impact of the death penalty on plea bargaining using two different sets of data. The first was a comparison of New York cases before and after the 1995 restoration of capital punishment in that state. Kuziemko found that the availability of capital punishment increased the willingness of murder defendants to sentence bargain, pleading guilty to their original charge but with a sentence less than the maximum. Kuziemko examined the degree of crime in a second part of her study using the same data as the present study but a different methodology, and she found that rather than the sentence and the proportion of death sentences in the prior year, that the classifying as a state would have the death penalty or not. She found that the death penalty makes defendants more likely to plead guilty to their original charge, as opposed to pleading to a reduced charge. In conclusion, I would just like to briefly review the points that we covered. The first one being closure and retribution, also deterrence of crimes, preventing the continuance of life behind bars, reducing prison overpopulation, and aiding as a plea bargaining strategy. Now, whether you are strongly for or against the capital punishment, I would like to request that you read the story of Amy Robinson and visit the website to see more information on the Garden of Angels that was started in her memory. This was a beautiful gesture that was began by placing a cross at the site where Amy's body was found, and then the garden just pretty much began to grow into a garden of remembrance for many other murder and abuse victims. The website is www.ourgardenofangels.org. You can also go and visit the site personally, as it is located in Euless, Texas, and you can also give donations to help with the upkeep of the garden. As a final thought, I would just like to say that the decision on the death penalty being right or wrong is based solely on emotion, whether we like it or not. And we have to be able to overcome those emotions as adults, and when it's necessary, do what's needed to keep our nation civilized and maintain order, peace, and justice. Sentencing a murderer to death will not corrupt the rightful people of our nation and make them run out and start committing crimes. It's simply going to eradicate the evil from this planet and away from innocent human beings. In addition, I would like to end with this quote from John McAdams, head of the Department of Political Science at Marquette University. If we execute murderers and there is in fact no deterrent effect, we have killed a bunch of murderers. If we fail to execute murderers and doing so would in fact have deterred other murderers, we have allowed the killing of a bunch of innocent victims. I would much rather risk the former. That to me is not a hard decision at all.